We're living in extraordinary times, and maybe you just want things to go back to normal. At United Way of the Greater Capital Region,
we want better than normal because normal just wasn't working for thousands of our neighbors, and old broken systems will not fix the challenges we face. The COVID-19 pandemic has put a spotlight on disparities in health, education, and opportunity in the capital region
and across the country. United Way not only provides the immediate support families need to survive, but also fights for long-term systemic changes needed to break generational cycles of exclusion.
We listen. We convene and collaborate with like-minded partners, and we use our resources to be a catalyst for change.
But we don't do our work alone, and we can't do it without you.
When the pandemic hit, United Way of the Greater Capital Region responded immediately, convening partners, donors, and volunteers to address the most urgent needs of our neighbors.
The impact has been severe for many, but some of our neighbors live in crisis all year long. So as we continue to recover, we know we have to do better.
With your help, we can reimagine a new normal
and rebuild a more equitable and resilient capital region.
We're in this together, and we're going to get out of this together if we work together.
It's people like you and our incredible community partners that help us drive real change to make sure every person has access to nutritious food,
every child has the opportunity to succeed in school, and working families aren't forced to make difficult trade-offs between basic needs like rent or healthcare.
We're all going to do better when everyone gets engaged in this fight.
So join us, because together we can
respond,
recover,
reimagine,
rebuild,
and live united.
Change starts here.
Good evening. I'm Peter Gannon, President and CEO of United Way of the Greater Capital Region, and thanks for tuning in to be here with us for what we hope is going to be a very special one-hour program with a real friend to our organization, John Zogby. I'll get to John in a minute, but first want to just speak a little to the video you just saw about this year's United Way campaign and the theme of respond, recover, reimagine, and rebuild. The COVID-19 pandemic has wreaked all kinds of havoc on the health and the economy here in the capital region and really across the country. And it's no surprise that the folks who we show up for at United Way every day have been most drastically impacted by the effects of the pandemic. So quick shout out that while tonight's program is free, we are accepting suggested donations at unitedwaygcr.org. You can also text STARTS HERE to 41444 and have that donation link sent directly to your mobile device. So we all do better when everybody's engaged in this fight, and that is really the crux of our efforts over the past month to drive engagement around the voter registration process, voter engagement, and actual participation in the election, not just coming up on November 3rd, but for years to come in local elections here in our community. And that's part of why having John here with us tonight is so special. I want to give a quick shout out to the man who really made this entire thing happen, a conversation that started in much simpler times back in February. A good friend and the former interim CEO of United Way, Wally Altus, who is actually here with us tonight. And it's just, it's great to see you, Wally, and thank you for your efforts in putting this all together and all you've done for United Way throughout the years. Tonight's event wouldn't be possible without the support of some very generous sponsors. Our lead sponsor on tonight's event, David Weinrob and the team at Brown and Weinrob. Actually, our hosts here in downtown Albany at 677 Prime, the New York State Health Plan Association, statewide public affairs, and also joining us tonight, Gavin Donahue, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the Independent Power Producer. So we have a very small group here. It'd be great to give those guys, nobody's heard a real round of applause in a while, so let's try and give them a real round of applause. That's not pumped in audio from a video game like you see on the football games all weekend long. That was the real deal. So I don't want to take too much time. I want to get right to the main attraction tonight. We're sitting here 2 weeks away from what is an election like I don't think we've ever seen or anticipated in the history of this country. And it's on the heels of an election we didn't think we'd ever see or anticipate in the history of this country just 4 years ago. But yet here we are, and at a time where the country seems as divided as ever. We are trying to find some common purpose and shared purpose to move the country forward. And everybody's wondering what's going to happen. And we have one of the best here to help break that down for us tonight. And if you don't know John Zogby, he's a pollster, author, trend spotter, and thought leader. He has spent the past 4 decades, starting as just a young boy, apparently, in Utica. Spent the past 4 decades as one of the most accurate pollsters in the world, conducting business in over 80 countries and leading the way in finding the meaning, story, direction, and usefulness that is involved in data collection. His client list is a who's who of Fortune 500 companies, including General Electric, Microsoft, Cisco, Coca-Cola, IBM, global NGOs like the World Health Organization, and government agencies like the United States State Department, the U.S. Department of Defense, and the mayors of New York City, Houston, and Miami, and even tonight we can say the United Way of the Greater Capital Region, though we haven't really asked you to find any opinions of what people think of us just yet. John's regular columns are in Forbes.com and the Washington Examiner. They dissect the intersection between cultural values and political behavior, and we're so thrilled to have him with us tonight to share some of those insights with us. So without further ado, John Zogby.
Thank you.
John?
Thanks. Thanks for having me back again. Thank you, Wally. If you don't hear that enough from hundreds and thousands of voices in the Capital District, you should. I'm speaking to a lot of people. Wally, like Cher, doesn't need a last name, right? Wally. Peter, thank you. Teddy, wherever you are, thanks for arranging. have to repeat the part about the exploratory committee?
Say something, please.
Testing, how's that? We coming in?
Getting volume, yeah.
Getting volume?
Okay, let's go with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, good. All right, thanks. So here's what we're going to do, the Armageddon election. I want to look quickly at the major themes that dominate this election, then go into the top issues, and then look at the Democrats and Republicans, their advantages and disadvantages. The strategies for both parties as we go forward in the next 2 weeks, and then a few words at the end about how to read polls. Because I will tell you right off the bat, the polls were fine 4 years ago. And I can say that in all honesty. I had sold my company, so I didn't poll 2016. So this is a moment of graciousness to my colleagues. The polls were fine. The pundits were the ones who were way off. And that was because they wanted to only saw what they wanted to see. So, how's that for tantalizing? So, here are the top major themes. I won't go into these in any greater detail, but certainly we'll be answering any questions you might have. Science versus skepticism. First of all, COVID has tested that and divided us into two almost warring camps over the coronavirus, no less. But this would have been a dominant theme on the issue of climate change as well. Who do you trust? Do you trust science, or do you trust actually your gut? Empathy versus rage. Democrats are certainly positioning themselves as the party of empathy. We understand who you are. We feel your pain. To some degree, Donald Trump had done that 4 years ago, but he won more so on the issue of rage. Just rage against the machine, clean the swamp. That is very much the dominant theme, and one of the reasons, many reasons why I think that we're looking at a fundamentally close race in the end. In fact, I have it as a 2-point race, and the Investors Business Daily poll, one of the ones that I really trust because they've been right the last 3 elections, right to the percentage point, also has it as a 2-point race. Stability versus disruption. Disruption is one of the factors that brought Donald Trump in, and it was understandable. He ran against an elite, ran against an establishment, spoke to the angry white male and beyond that we've been hearing so much about since Ross Perot and Pat Buchanan. But the issue is it time for a cooling off? Has there been too much disruption? And Joe Biden, as a member of the Democratic Party's establishment, is running to represent kind of a stable hand of experience. Healthcare. Is it a right or is it a privilege? Healthcare always shows up, as we'll see, as one of the top 3 issues. But is it a right? Most Americans believe that it is, as opposed to a privilege. However, there is a very vocal minority that disagrees with the right. And now, even though there's a lot of nuance in between this 5th theme, there are people who believe that all lives matter, to be sure, but the election is being framed, the campaign is being framed as Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter, and there is plenty of juice on both sides. And one of the things that I want you to understand about our business is that we deal with majorities and pluralities, but we also measure intensities. And if there is a highly intense group of people on an issue, that can drive the issue much more than soft support for a majority. Top issues. The economy, of course, is number 1, but it's hand in glove with COVID-19. The cause of the economic problems today, tens of millions of people that are out of work, and the tens of millions who will not ever be called back to their job, is COVID related. Those are dual crises,
these dual crises that affect every American, even though the more Americans, 56% according to Gallup, say that they're doing better off now than they were, they're not necessarily feeling it. And it all depends. The same 56% who say that they're doing better also say that Donald Trump is doing a poor job or disapprove of the job he's doing. Healthcare is the third issue, and it's always up there. At some points in recent history, it's actually been number one. And what are the healthcare issues? Affordability, accessibility, and insurance. In that order, a majority of Americans support the Affordable Care Act and support Barack Obama, a kind of majority that he never really experienced while he was president. Racism comes in at number 4. How can that be? We're talking about an election where my turnout model is suggesting that 31%, the highest ever, of the turnout on election day will be non-white. Now, what makes that issue even more intense is that 40% of those who turn out on election day will be under 40 years of age. And just to put things in proper perspective, I am an older baby boomer, and my age cohort is 81% white. I have 3 sons going from late 30s to early 40s. Their age cohort is 61% white. My grandchildren, and that even includes those who would be my grandchildren's age, who are now Gen Z, they are 50-50, non-white to white. That is, so when young people march against racism, in effect they're saying, we're not marching for them, we're marching for us. That's a very important thing to keep in mind. Immigration, always an issue. And it all depends whether you identify the issue as illegal aliens or the Statue of Liberty. And lastly, climate change. And what puts climate change in the top 6 are millennials and especially Gen Z. According to them, that is the number 2 issue after the economy. That's the highest of any of the age cohorts. Democrats' advantages, I'm going to run through these. The Electoral College history favors the Democrats. You go back to 1992, there have been 7 elections. In 6 of those elections, Democrats, just by virtue of showing up, could count on 242 of 270 electoral votes. In many ways, it was Hillary Clinton who blew that. That's the 7th election. And by losing what had been comfortably Democratic states in the previous 6 elections, she changed the meaning of that history. But still, if history is relevant at all, Democrats should be favored. Demographic growth, well, I just pointed out, we're looking at a turnout model that represents closer to the turnout model that elected Barack Obama twice. Typically, black Americans have been 10% of the total turnout. Under Barack Obama, it was 12.9% and 13.1%. If you figure 90+% of blacks who turn out vote Democrat, then what you're looking at is if there's an increase in the turnout from 10% to 13% of the total, you're looking at a lot of Democratic voters. Demographically, we're also looking at the largest age cohort now are not boomers anymore. The largest age cohort are millennials. And then there's Gen Z. These 2 groups together, I'm not going to say that they're militantly pro-Democrat, but I will say that they are militantly anti-Republican. And approximately about 28% of these groups identify as Republican, whereas about 38 or 39% identify as, that's just of millennials and Gen Z. The nominee, at least thus far, Joe Biden, is less controversial than Hillary Clinton and generally considered by more to be a nice guy. Also generally considered, Hillary Clinton's problem from day one was that polls showed that 36% trusted her to tell the truth. That was from January of 2016 to election day in the exit polls, 2016. Now, only 37% trusted Donald Trump to tell the truth, but there was no high moral ground the Democrats brought. Joe Biden at least is considered to be a nice guy and considered to be someone who tells the truth more than he doesn't tell the truth. Goodwill towards the Obamas and Biden's empathy and experience. In my polling over the years, 21% of Americans tell us that at least one of the two defining moments in their lives was some kind of deep personal tragedy. Biden kind of symbolizes that. All right, Democrats' disadvantages. Well, it had been disunity. It looks like the party has unified itself, but there are still some elements within the party, mainly on the progressive side and mainly on the younger side, for whom voting against Donald Trump is simply not enough. They're not quite there with Joe Biden yet, although the party unity is less of a problem. There's a lack of enthusiasm among some key groups. We had found in previous polling, although it's starting to dissipate a bit, young black men were supporting Donald Trump considerably higher than young people in general or voters in general. Progressives, still there are some out there who need to be convinced, not a lot, but really importantly, Democrats are going to need every vote that they can get. I'll explain in a moment. Biden's age clearly has been an issue and continues to be an issue, particularly for Republicans, particularly for conservatives, but it's still out there. And there are a lot of folks that tell us every time there's a debate or a public event, we're just watching. Even if we support him, we're just watching and hoping that there isn't a mishap of some sort. Biggest problem that Democrats have had over the years simply is elitism. Sort of the attitude that you're so stupid, but if I could convince you to be smarter and agree with me, then you'd vote. The party itself has become an East Coast, West Coast. It had been wider, obviously, when the economy was better and before COVID took hold. But still, even now, Donald Trump is perceived as the winner by more and as simply a winner. Republicans have a solid base. When Trump himself said in 2016, I can shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and my support will remain rock solid at 42%. He was right. And that has included something to many which is even worse than killing somebody at Fifth Avenue, and that is not paying your taxes or ending up paying $750 in taxes and not a whimper from that base whatsoever. It is solidly with him. Let me explain how solid it is. In my August 29th poll nationwide, 77% of Republicans said that they would vote for Donald Trump. 18% said that they would vote for Joe Biden. The rest were undecided. By my October 2nd poll, it was 94% of Republicans who said that they would vote for Donald Trump and 4% for Joe Biden. That is bedrock, rock solid. And I might add, Republicans are registering voters especially in battleground states, at the same pace that Democrats, or in some instances like Wisconsin and Florida, out-register Democrats. Potential inroads among non-white and younger voters, that is dissipating, but at one point, back in late August, we had 33% of young black men saying that they would vote for Donald Trump. Now, it's still at around 24, 25%. That could be a problem. If Donald Trump reaches 11 or 12% support among blacks as a total, that could make this race even tighter, more interesting. Disadvantages, obviously, economic and health crises. Regardless of who people blame, the guy at the top normally gets the credit or the blame. And this goes back, this first disadvantage, to the Ronald Reagan question. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago, he asked. And that sort of withered Jimmy Carter back in 1980. Disadvantage, low polling numbers overall and on handling key issues. Trump is tied with who's better able to handle the economy. And that's with tens of millions of people unemployed. That is with really a sense of hopelessness among Gen Z and younger millennials. He's given, there are majorities who disapprove of his handling of every other issue. The direction of the country, you've never seen anything like it since the last few months. On average, 68% say the country is heading in the wrong direction. In some polls, as high as 73, 74% wrong direction. That includes then, if you're looking that high, a lot of Republicans and a lot of independents. Now, on one hand, you might say, well, they think Congress is at fault. Nancy Pelosi is at fault. That can be true. But generally, over the years, since it's been asked by Gallup, and for the first time in the early 1970s, that's a reflection on the person in charge. And then lastly, has there been too much disruption? Have we gotten to a point where even the coronavirus, COVID-19, is a political, a partisan issue? So what are quickly the strategies? First is for the Democrats is to build upon and strengthen the Obama coalition. That worked very well for Barack Obama in 2008, 2012. Interestingly, he was never able to translate that into a Democratic coalition during the off election years, and there were almost record losses of Democratic seats in Congress in 2010 and 2014. But if Biden can put together that Obama coalition of blacks, Latinos, Asian Americans, younger voters, particularly young women, and the creative class, a group of 45 million strong that work in the knowledge economy, Democrats should win. And if they can, white women and voters over 65. What's the key there for Democrats? The behavior of the president, the personality of the president. Donald Trump won white women by 20 points 4 years ago. In the most recent polling, he and Joe Biden are even. He also won voters over 65 by 10 points last time. Most recent polling has it virtually tied between the two. Today's Investors Business Daily had a 3-point advantage among older voters. And a large turnout of young, especially young women. Let me explain what that means. In 2012, people don't remember, it was fundamentally a close race between Obama and Romney going into the weekend before the election. And essentially, whereas Obama had won 66% of 18 to 29-year-olds back in 2008. He was polling only in the low to mid-50s among 18 to 29-year-olds going into that weekend. It was the Saturday before the election that we saw the dam break, and that by election day, he ended up winning 61%, good enough, of 18 to 29-year-olds. But it was a heightened turnout, and 73% of young women who voted for Obama that put him over the top. Strategies for the Republicans are very clear. It's hard to see a strategy where Trump appeals to a majority, demographically and politically. So one of the things that he has to do is, number one there, create doubts about Biden, especially among younger and non-white voters. He has to paint the Democrats as socialists, focus on Blue Lives Matter as a means of winning back white women and voters over 65. You heard this week, suburban women, love me, please love me. That was almost a plea on the part of the president to try to win back suburban moms who are particularly interested in security and safety. Attack Biden's age and tout the Trump record before COVID-19. And there's a misspelling there. I'm going to take care of that. Made it French. COVID. Be careful reading the polls. Go to Real Clear Politics or 538, the aggregators, but click on the poll and ask just one question. Just scroll down. How many Democrats are in the sample? How many Republicans are in the sample? Basically, I cut my eye teeth polling this state and nationally by making sure that the demographics and considerations like party and region were well represented. Approximately 38% or so of voters in the U.S. identify themselves as Democrats. 34% of were CNN, ABC, Washington Post, NBC, 45% Democrat, 28% Republican. 44% Democrat, 33% Republican. Well, if you consider every percentage point of Democrat you add to your sample, you're increasing that Democratic candidate's lead by 1 percentage point, as you are by decreasing the number of Republicans. You've got a poll that's off. I feel very comfortable saying that. Look, anything can happen over the next 2 weeks. I just don't believe that this is a 14, 15, 12, or 10 point race. Watch for movement among independents. Right now, Biden leads independents by this much. Today's Investors Business Day, that's the only brand new poll that's come out. That's why I keep going, aside from respecting your work a lot. Biden leads 45-41. That tells me 14% of independents, I have 12%, same thing, of independents are undecided. Now, are they even going to vote? And if they're undecided, right, with 2 weeks to go, maybe they're not going to vote at all. That throws everything off. Then look out for numbers of undecideds among key groups. If I see the numbers of blacks undecided, well, they're not going to vote for Trump. That means they're not going to vote. That's what happened with Hillary in the end. Hispanics, you see a bump up in the undecideds. Same thing with Republicans, or with Donald Trump. The number of evangelicals, for example, undecided go up, then that means he's losing support and that that group probably is not going to vote. So ultimately, that's it, except I just want to call your attention that my son and I do a podcast every Friday. It's on our website, John Zogby Strategies, and it's a millennial and his old dad, who actually love each other and who don't agree on everything, but it's a very civil conversation that we have. And then Jeremy writes the bi-weekly Intelligentsia, where he takes our polling and projects into the future of work and the future of communities and the future of political parties and the future of everything. And it's a hoot. It's a lot of fun. And there you have it. Thank you. And thank you back home.
Yeah. John, thank you so much. Give John a round of applause. Doing 30 minutes is tough. Have a seat. So I'm thinking maybe we can just chat for a couple minutes. I prepared 7 or 8 questions and then sat in the back wringing my hands as you methodically went through each one of the questions I had prepared. But one thing you didn't touch on is that I think a lot of folks are interested in. We're sitting a block away from the Leo O'Brien Federal Building, which hosts the office of somebody who's really concerned with what happens down the ballot in Chuck Schumer, who would stand to become the majority leader of the Senate. Do you have any take or any insights you can share on what's happening down the ballot?
Yeah, from the vantage point of today, it looks pretty good. I would say 60-40% wise that the Democrats take.
60 seats would be a lot.
It will not be 60 seats. So what are we looking at then? Pretty much in this order. I think Democrats pick up Arizona, Colorado, Maine, Iowa. There's 4 right there. They lose 1, probably, in Alabama. They've got a very good, so that 4 is enough, especially enough if Joe Biden wins. Doesn't win, they need all 4 of those seats. Good shots also, I did mention Maine, right? Yeah, good shot also in Montana. And 1 of the 2 seats, if not both seats, in Georgia. It depends on the turnout. Now, let me explain something I didn't get into. To complicate matters even more, you see that, about 31 million people have voted already. Understand that among people who have or say they're going to vote early, Biden leads by 16. Among those who say that they're going to vote only on Election Day, Trump leads by 18. So that complicates things. It further complicates things for the Senate races.
Sure.
But then lastly, it complicates things scenario. There's a number of doomsday scenarios. One of which is that on Election Day, Donald Trump is leading and declares victory. And then 4 or 5, however many days later, all of the votes are counted, Biden wins, and Trump says, this is a rigged election. Don't trust the mail ballots. There's a number of those kinds of scenarios.
I think when considering a Trump victory and the possibility of it.
Can I stop you for 1 second?
Of course.
I don't think Biden has much encouragement necessarily to accept a Trump re-election either. I'll just be bipartisan on this one.
Yeah, when considering the possibility of a Trump election, it almost seems the path for him, like he could eke out a similar electoral college victory like he did 4 years ago, but the gap on the popular vote will be wider. The loss on the popular vote would be maybe even substantially wider.
He can go, he can lose by as much as 4.5, 4.7%, which translates into it depends on turnout.
Yeah.
But translates into a much larger popular vote deficit, but still win Florida, Pennsylvania, and a couple of the bigger states.
If you're still logged in at home, you can shoot a question in the Facebook chat, right? And we can ask John for you. We're going to put the very small studio audience, the 8 of you, on the spot momentarily to hear what your thoughts are. So, Gavin, I know you've probably got a zinger or 2 queued up. Before we hand it over to these guys, I'm curious, how do these major news stories, it feels like there isn't much, honestly, I walked in here tonight thinking Joe Biden had, by all appearances, a very commanding lead, and you You disagreed with that almost immediately at the top of your presentation. But how do these major newsmaking events of like the past 2 weeks impact things? Is there anything in particular that you see is working well in Trump's favor or working well in Biden's favor when we're talking about the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, Trump's COVID diagnosis and recovery, the debate, the stuff about Hunter Biden, the revelations about Trump's personal finances? Are any of those, especially like in these geographic areas that Biden seemingly needs, Michigan, Wisconsin, are any of those particularly effective in moving the needle one way or the other?
Not really, except that they reinforce the highly intense supporters already. So at this point in time, we have about 3% of the voters are undecided. That's really very low. Usually, we'll have 7-8% who are undecided, and then another 10 to 15 whose support is soft. In this instance, there's almost no soft support at all. 91% of Democrats and 94% of Republicans. So all of that money that's being spent and all of these events are being geared for that 3%. And we could end up with a situation where those voters say, all right, I believe both of you. Neither of you are worthy. And
interesting enough. Let's go to our audience here. Does anybody have a question for John that you'd like to just stand right up and let it rip? Go ahead, Gavin.
Just, John, thank you for coming in, and Peter, it's wonderful you put this together. I was taking some notes, I find this fascinating. Just a couple things that you said, John, I'm trying to follow up on. Are the pollsters confident that they're capturing all these new voters? You know, you mentioned the new states and the polling we read every day. That's one question. I have a couple others, but I want to see, are we capturing these new voters?
It might be great to repeat that real quick, just so we pick it up on the mic.
So Gavin wants to know if we pollsters are confident we're capturing the new voters. I feel I am. You know, some of the pollsters, Gallup, for example, used to just poll people who had voted in previous elections and then screen in as likely voters people who had voted in 2 out of the 3 last elections. We never did that. We stopped that. We poll every household and extract from their likely voters, and then there is a voter screen. You know, you have to tell us what political party you are. The closer we get to the election, are you definitely or very likely to vote? The somewhat likelies get tossed out. But I feel we're getting the right representation of younger voters. I see that in the raw sample, even before we apply weights and adjustments.
And just to follow up to that, it was interesting you started off and you said, well, the polls were right, the pundits were wrong.
Yeah.
How do pollsters deal with somebody who's sitting in a middle America who doesn't want to say they want to vote for Donald Trump because of the stigmatism that comes along with that? How do you factor that into the methodology of these polls? Because obviously that happened 4 years ago. It could happen again. I'm trying to always ascertain people just don't want to answer these questions.
I'm smiling because Kathy and I were at a favorite haunt in Utica, Ventura's. And the guy sitting at the next table, who I played Little League with a number of years ago, looked over at me and he said, I just want you to know Trump's going to win. He said, because there are too many voters who are too scumbari to mention. And so I had to look that one up. That's embarrassed, it means. So the scumbari voter, you know, we can't go back and say that you just lied to me. I don't believe there's enough to make it a conspiracy, you know, because you do a random sampling, and sure, I think there are going to be some people who lie. There may be, you know, very well be. I'm just not sure how we could ever capture that. But I feel confident that all of my demographics and all of my likely voter screens are solid, and I honestly think that it is a tighter race. Now, I'll have a poll out the day before the election, and we'll see if my poll has moved. But honestly, I feel confident that some of these other polls are just off the mark.
John, you mind taking a couple questions from people watching at home?
Please, no. How are you?
Good competitor. The others are off, but you're right on target.
I'm glad you came in for that.
One question from home. Despite Joe Biden coming across as an honest person more often than not, how do you feel his frequent gaffes could negatively impact his bid for the presidency? Well, let me add on to that it does seem the stakes are much higher for Joe Biden every time he speaks publicly. It's not like Donald Trump is immune to gaffes. It's in fact quite the opposite. But yet it doesn't seem to, Donald Trump has seemed to immunize himself against the gaffe. What is it doing to Biden?
I think we're at a comfortable point among Biden's supporters that as long as he leaves the stage, not only still standing, but I think since the early primaries, even the ones that he went on to lose, what always impressed me, and hence other voters as well, is that he would stay afterward. And in the earlier days, during the primaries, he'd be in a squat position at the front of the stage, taking selfies and leaning this. I would have keeled over myself. So there is a certain robustness that comes across with him. As far as the gaffes are concerned, that was Joe Biden 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And Joe, just a gaffe machine.
Another question from home from Kyla. What do the polls show? Thanks for watching, Kyla. What do the polls show about both candidates' age? Is the vice president nominee being taken? Is there evidence that there's more consideration given to the vice president, the running mate, due to the candidate's age, and how that is impacting the election?
I think the media has focused on the age issue a lot, and there are indeed some, those, particularly I think the Biden voters that needed to be persuaded that he was right and up for it. At this point, though, it's between a bunch of things. Number one, it's between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Kamala Harris is doing what good vice presidential nominees do, and that is pretty much disappear and take the back roads. Same thing with Mike Pence. It's never more than a 1% factor. Number two, and I think this is really vital to understand, that I'm having a Rick Perry moment. And that was only on number one. What was the question again?
It's about the impact the vice presidential candidates are having on the race.
Yeah, really, ultimately, really very little. And the two presidential candidates kind of just cancel each other out pretty much. But in 1996, Bob Dole was 73. And in 2008, John McCain was 73. Age was not an issue with McCain. Here we are, this far forward. Just consider now the fact that baby boomers, those of us who plan to live forever, really make up a large chunk of the electorate. And we are living longer. The average, the life expectancy is still higher than our two presidential candidates. So it's not getting the sort of resonance.
From Joel at home, thanks for watching, Joel, and tuning in tonight. What do you think's the likelihood, I think I know your answer to this question already, what do you think the likelihood of Biden winning enough states with votes counted through election night to be an indisputable victor? And obviously, we would say take that question the other way.
Yeah. Well, look, we have 2 weeks to go. And if those other polls are right, then or if that ultimately develops, that there are more Democrats who show up than Republicans, then Biden can. I think it's very, very unlikely that they have,
Yeah,
barring anything unforeseen.
You had a statistic earlier about the discrepancy between election day voters and early voters, where the likelihood would almost seem Donald Trump could be way ahead Tuesday night, 2 weeks from now, yet, and then, as it seems strategically, he's called into question already the validity of the election. 2-week effort while these states start to count, that would essentially perhaps bring Biden ahead, that the entire validity of that becomes questioned and we end up in more turmoil.
Even if Donald Trump himself were to sort of back off and maybe just say, oh, I'm tired, I think his supporters are energized.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't have to be every supporter. It has to be the most vocal supporters. I, for one, am not optimistic about what happens in this election cycle. What do I think? I think today, I think Biden wins. I just don't know if Trump loses.
I mean, I feel like that's a period on our night, but I want to give a chance for anybody who's here with us in person to ask a question. Brian, go ahead.
John, thank you for coming. I thought the point that you made about watching who was actually being polled, was interesting. And it made me think about the 2016 election, and afterward, all we heard about was Russia's influence through social media. Just curious how much that throws a wrench into the polls. If you could touch on that.
Well, is it happening? Yes, it is. And it's Russian. I think the intelligence reports on that are clear. I think it's Chinese. I think it's a 15-year-old Romanian kid, a 14-year-old Filipino as well. It's how so many of us get our information, misinformation, and sift through our information. Impact on the polls? No, I mean, ultimately, people tell us who they're going to vote for on the basis of their feelings or the information that they have. And to be sure, we've always experienced misinformation and disinformation. Going back, you should, and just Wikipedia this one, just go back and look at the election of 1800. Jefferson versus the Federalist Party. And I'm sorry.
We have a heckler.
No, but I think maybe you were. Some days I feel like that.
Great.
But, yeah, I mean, the disinformation was palpable, and back then the French were involved, at least that we know.
Awesome. Thanks. What are you projecting in terms? This comes from Florence. Thanks for tuning in, Florence. What are you projecting in terms of total votes cast in comparison to possible voters? Are we at risk still of a minority government? Less people voting than eligible?
No, I really
Less than
think
50%.
that we're looking at a record turnout. All indicators are pointing that way. We're looking at our model reflects a much higher turnout this year than in 2016, and probably even higher than 2012, which was the highest to date. We actually lost a couple of million voters from 2012, 2016. I'm projecting a lot of younger voters. Now, when Obama won the first time, it was a 61% voter turnout. That was almost unheard of. The last time we'd had that was Jack Kennedy. That was a tight race, Kennedy versus Nixon. Other than that, they had slid down to the mid-50s and low 50s in terms of percentile of voters. Everything I'm reading, and then everything I'm seeing in terms of response rates in my polls suggests that there's a tremendous amount of interest.
All right. You think Biden wins. You don't know if Trump loses. Prediction is a blue Senate.
I think
today.
Yes, today.
And that's
I can tell you
something we can take across the street to Chuck Schumer if we want to.
Yes, you can.
Time for one last question here in the room. Did anybody have one before we sign off for the night? Amber. Amber Schiller.
Hi, John. Thank you for coming. I follow 538 pretty closely, so does my husband. We're kind of data nerds. And I was wondering what you thought about Biden's chances of winning Texas being just as close as Trump's chances of winning Florida on the state races. I think it's kind of interesting that Texas might go blue this election.
Yeah, Texas goes blue if there's a massive wave. I'm not sure that we're there yet. It's a burgeoning blue state, though. There's no question. Just like it fell short in the Senate race 2018, Beto O'Rourke, I think it may still fall short this time, but closer and very competitive. Florida, I'm really in close touch with folks in Florida. They're telling me huge voter turnouts in southern Florida, but they're also telling me about huge voter turnouts in Jacksonville, the Tallahassee conservative territory. So I think Florida is just going to be another head scratcher. Slight advantage Biden, but not yet.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a real treat to have. We can give live applause sounds so good after not really hearing it for so long. So you can go to unitedwaygcr.org. We have an entire section on our website dedicated to participation in this year's election. Early voting starts here in New York this Saturday, the 24th, runs through the 1st, and then Election Day, November 3rd. So get out there and vote, participate, whichever way you go. Participation is key. And we appreciate everyone being here with us tonight. And John, thank you so much. And also, quick to recognize, joining us, Neil Golub, who came in mid-program, had another commitment tonight, but great to have Neil here with us as well. So thanks so much for tuning in, and appreciate it.